And it was actually the excitement about the art of the possible with LinkedIn data that drew me to LinkedIn to begin with. Prior to LinkedIn, I worked in strategy consulting at Bain & Company, where among the biggest questions that companies face as they looked towards future growth was, what do we do about talent? Where is the talent, and how can we harness that? And far and away, the data source I was most hungering for, but never had access to, was LinkedIn. So here I am, now head of global insights at LinkedIn. LinkedIn sits on a wealth of data about the professional global economy. We can understand patterns of how talent migrates from one geography to another, about which skills are emerging versus declining, about industry migration patterns, and about behavior on our platform, which gives an indication of kind of how recruiting is happening in real time. With this, we can help companies with their workforce strategy, with their talent strategy. And one area of that is gender diversity. So I've been very excited over the past year or so to be able to dig into a number of different studies and pieces of research on gender diversity. Headline, this talk will take the it will feel like kind of a Mary Meeker, like fly through a ton of different data. My hope is that some of it gives you some inspiration, helps you ask questions, and helps you think through how it might adapt your perspectives as you go back into the world and look at people analytics from the data set that you all are closest to, which is more internal HR. One thing to note before I get started is we recognize that gender identity is not always binary, and for many individuals, there are many ways in which they would choose to characterize themselves. Just for the purposes of simplicity of analysis and being able to extract insights, we are using binary definitions here, but not meant to be a reflection of how people actually show themselves. So, where are we now? The World Economic Forum publishes a global gender gap report every year. The latest one, published in 2020, says it will take 99 years to reach global gender parity. That's a pretty daunting figure. They look at a number of different things. They look at access to economic opportunity, educational attainment, health and wellness, and apologies, I had my notes, but they're not showing on the screen, and political empowerment. Over the past year, LinkedIn has actually worked very closely with the World Economic Forum to introduce a new dimension into their analysis, which is looking at growth patterns of the professional economy. So not just how is the underlying population health, but where is the opportunity? How is that changing with respect to the skill mix to be able to provide for the jobs that will be in the future versus were in the past? So 99 years to reach gender parity globally. It's improved actually over the past 14 years, but still a daunting figure. In addition, when you dig into the professional context, the latest research from McKinsey and Lean In the Women in the Workplace report shows that only 1 in 5 C-suite executives today are women. The good news is, over the past 5 years that they've done this study, it's up from 17% 5 years ago. The bad news is, when you look at more junior populations, 48% are women. So you're starting at an initial base of 48, only getting to 21. The stat that for me is even more compelling is one that I saw in a New York Times article a couple years ago, where they looked at Fortune 500 companies and looked at the prevalence of women at the CEO level there, and found that there are more men named John who are CEOs of large companies than there are women altogether. Astounding fact, and makes it hard to be able to make tremendous progress to accelerate if your leadership is reflecting numbers like that. Where LinkedIn has dug in further in our work with the World Economic Forum is into the tech sector, to dig into not just where things are today, but also where they're going. So we looked at some of the most fastest growing jobs and fastest growing skills across the global economy, two of which are artificial intelligence and cloud computing. In these populations, and this is looking at the population at large, not just leadership, only 22% of artificial intelligence professionals globally are female. Now, this is not just people who are currently in artificial intelligence roles, but people who are representing themselves with a skill set that we would normally attribute to an artificial intelligence professional. Moreover, less than 12% of women, less than 12% of those working in cloud computing are women. This is important for two reasons. Number one, these are the fastest growing skills and occupations. So if there's this big of a delta today, and these are the skills and occupations that are growing the fastest, that's going to become a wider portion of the overall mix going forward, which makes it difficult for the broad gender gap to improve. Second is these technologies are critical towards building global technology at scale. Take artificial intelligence, for example. It's effectively writing the rules that are currently dictated by human decision-making systems, human decision-making into systems that then will achieve massive global scale. If those rules are being interpreted, written, and programmed into code by a population that doesn't represent the population it's designing for, it is very difficult to not introduce bias and to not reflect the bias that already exists in the system. So this is a really important area to watch. Unfortunately, what we're finding is so far, while the growth of these skills is increasing a lot across the board, that growth is not growing faster for women than for men. So we don't yet see a change in the supply of talent in either of these areas. Why does this matter to us? In addition to sitting on top of this data, our vision is to create economic opportunity for every member of the global workforce. A big way in which we do this is a global technology platform that is underpinned by a lot of artificial intelligence algorithms and a lot of these skills of the future. So it is critically important to us to be able to, in order to realize our mission, to be able to reflect that population. So in 2014, LinkedIn took a look at ourselves internally. What we found was at the more junior levels, manager and below, women represented 40% of the population. Not quite a 50-50 mix, but reasonably close. At the director level is where we saw more disparity. Only 25% of our director plus population in 2014 were female. What this meant is at a leadership table where decisions would get made, you may see a table of only men. And this was not where we wanted to be, both as a company and as a steward of global technology that can permeate the rest of the world. So put together, these are a bunch of really depressing statistics. And they also tend to be good headlines for talks like this that then set the stage. Companies tend to take these statistics in one of two ways. Number one, they say, this is important to us. We want to get to 50-50. Let's set 50-50 as our goalpost, and just assume the business will figure out how to get there, because that rallying cry will drive it forward. That unfortunately then creates a ton of legwork for folks like yourselves and your team to then figure out how we get there when the goal may or may not be achievable. The second path that companies take is the conservative incremental approach, which is let's understand our starting point internally, and let's set a goal where every year we try to increase a percentage point or two, set that goal to each functional leader, and then we're in a good spot going forward. But we've basically peanut butter spread the challenge, and may not be thinking aggressively enough and may not be doing enough to actually get to grow faster than the 99-year challenge. So fixing the broken rung starts with understanding where it is. In part, that is driven by internal data, like knowing how your own population plays out. But what we have unique access into is the ability to look externally as well. So we came out recently with the Talent Insights product. For those of you who have stopped by the LinkedIn booth, you may have seen it or interacted with it. It enables companies to look at the breakdown of their workforce relative to their industry or any other industries that they would benchmark against. And to look at that at an incredibly granular level, to understand patterns by location, by function, by specific skills, like skills within artificial intelligence or cloud computing, for example. And what this enables is for companies to take a more nuanced view as to where their starting point is and where their challenges are. In this case, this is a hypothetical company called Flexus that finds that their overall workforce is 34% female relative to an industry standard of 40%. That would tell them overall they've got a 6-point gap, but realistically, they could then dig down into, okay, well, how significant is that gap in Dublin, Ireland for sales, for professionals with CRM skill sets and things like that, that then enable them to understand a little bit more how big their broken rung is, where it sits, and therefore be able to set targets accordingly, and know areas in which they're going to have a hard time moving those targets. For example, looking back at my cloud computing and AI example, with only 12% of the full talent supply of cloud computing professionals being female, if you have a goalpost of getting to 40 or 50%, you're going to have to be doing things that are far outside of what the normal patterns would dictate. And so that actually provides the avenues for investment. So let me dive deep into the area of recruiting, because this is an area where LinkedIn's data particularly shines. I shared a little bit about what we have on global aggregate populations, but I think the insight we have uniquely into recruiting is behavioral data into how men and women approach job searches and how recruiters respond to men and women based on the data happening on our platform. A year ago, we developed the Gender Insights Report, in which we looked to expose some of this data to help start a conversation between candidates, recruiters, talent acquisition professionals, HR professionals, and hiring managers to understand where the disconnects are. Here's what we found. First, men and women are equally open to new roles. For those that are actively job seeking, we found about 90% of both would indicate that they are open via our profile. Second, they both approach their job searches similarly. We found that men and women were equally likely to research jobs, research company pages in their job search. Here's where things broke down. After viewing jobs, women are 16% less likely to apply. Do the same exploration, the same research, 16% less likely to convert. Even more so, 26% less likely to take the action to ask for a referral. This point is important because our data has also shown that people who ask for a referral are 9 times more likely to get hired. So women are doing the research, but then not taking as many of the steps to actually position themselves to get the job and to get as many at-bats. The silver lining is that for the women who do decide to take the action of applying, asking for referral, and taking an action, they're 16% more likely to get hired. So it shows that the broken rung on the candidate side is really moving from the exploration towards taking a concrete action to apply. That's an insight that recruiters can use, and recruiters can help fill. Are they doing it? Our data suggests not consistently. Our data suggests that recruiters are 13% less likely to click on a woman's profile when she appears in search results. So they're faced with a page, men and women on the page, 13% less likely to click. But when they do click, they're almost as likely to then send a message to a woman as they are to a man. So you have both sides of the marketplace stuck at the exact same part of the broken rung, which is getting the applications going. So what can companies do to reach more female candidates? And what have we done, or what are we doing to help enable that? I shared a little bit about talent insights earlier and how companies can use it to help understand their starting point and how that compares to the industry. They then can take that information to understand talent pools, to look at where are the hidden gem areas where there may be a more gender diverse talent pool. So in this case, that fictional company Flexus had identified that engineering was a challenge for them. So they decided to look at purposely targeting a higher percentage of talent pools that are more likely to include more women. So they can look up by industry where might there be a more gender diverse talent pool for the specific skill sets that they're looking at. In this case, they found that healthcare was one that has a higher proportion of women, and maybe something that's worth looking at that they hadn't before. They can also do the same with location, which may prompt questions around workforce planning, relocation, and other broader strategic questions in order to help with diversity challenges. We also recognize that there's things we can do within our own algorithms and what we surface to recruiters. So we have actually done a lot of work with our core recruiter product, which is what recruiters use to identify and message candidates, to make sure that for any given search, a representative gender balance shows up in the first couple of pages, so that it's actually designed into the algorithm. We call this diversity by design. Finally, we can give recruiters a better sense of how they're performing and where they're dropping off in the hiring funnel, in hiring women versus men. So is the challenge in getting people to apply? Is the challenge in their outreach and messaging and so on, so that we could take that broad level statistic that I shared earlier and make it much more personalized and specific to that recruiter's experience. Recognize, though, that getting people in the door, while it may be the area where LinkedIn has historically had the biggest space to play, is not enough. And in actually fixing the broken rung, it requires looking at career development and people success as well. I'm not going to go as deep here because I actually believe that more of the interesting people analytics and data sources here come from within an internal company versus outside, but I will share a little bit. We partnered with the International Labor Organization to look at promotion rates and leadership rates by country, and found that in every country we looked at, then there are more male leaders than female leaders. Probably not a surprising statistic, but it is helpful to look at the delta and how that differs by country. Because as you look at global workforce strategies, understanding that in India there are 5 times as many male leaders as there are female leaders, kind of helps understand what might be possible there versus the United States, where it's a little bit tighter. The more interesting finding to me was, while there are a lot fewer female leaders than male leaders in every country that we looked at, the women who do reach management and leadership roles get to their first leadership position faster than men, 1.4 years faster. Maybe a selection bias, I don't know, but that gives me hope that there's path towards acceleration. Then, once people make it to the top, how successful are they? How are they perceived? And how much is that halo effect trickling down to the rest of the global workforce? We developed a report last year called Language Matters, where we looked at words used to describe men and women at different parts in their journey. And one area that we looked at that I thought was really exciting was a partnership with a company called Trendkite, where we looked at media perception and media associations. So we looked over the course of 2018 at 25 major publications and which words they associated with prominent male leaders and female leaders. One of the more stark findings in comparing Mark Zuckerberg versus Sheryl Sandberg is that the word powerful is associated with Mark Zuckerberg in the media 6 times as much as it is with Sheryl Sandberg. In the same token, the word reserved was associated with Sheryl Sandberg more than 3,000 times. Now, I actually worked in Sheryl Sandberg's organization as an intern during business school, so I had the opportunity to meet her then and have had the opportunity to hear her speak multiple times since. She is far from someone that I would describe as reserved. But that's the public perception. Speaking of reserved was the most common word association in the media associated with Theresa May, Prime Minister of Britain. And it was actually referenced in almost 26% of the publications that she's referenced in. Perhaps not surprisingly, that the word reserved was not used at all, or not much at all, with Donald Trump. That probably would surprise no one. But the word most associated with him was strong in the media. So here's what we have. Powerful and strong on one side, reserved on the other. This is the public perception that is being shared about those who have made it to the top. Is it possible that that perception has some inkling on the behaviors of people who are more junior and on some of the patterns of willingness to go beyond exploration of the job to clicking apply towards asking for a referral and others? Unclear. Causality is always challenging to determine, but it's important to understand the power of language and to know that as you're looking at data to inform your own company's diversity, inclusion, and belonging strategy, it's influenced not only by what you're doing at your own company, but also what people are seeing externally. So 3 quick and perhaps simple takeaways of what to do. 1, understand your starting point. A more nuanced view of where your problem areas are, where your broken rungs are, and what your goalposts are is really important. 2nd, do your research. There's no one-size-fits-all solution towards fixing gender diversity challenges, but understanding what'll work for your organization and how that'll play out is important. 3rd, implement. And I think my advice on implement would be think big, act small, and improve along the way. I mentioned towards the beginning that LinkedIn, as of 5 years ago, had 25% of our Director Plus population was female. Today, we're at 41%. Dramatic improvements over the past 5 years. This has taken a wealth of actions across the entire business. Cannot be solved by recruiting alone, cannot be solved by people success alone, cannot be solved by L&D alone, cannot be solved by HR alone. Couple things that we did. 1, invest heavily in inclusion recruiting to help fix the recruiting broken rung, instituted the Rooney Rule, and looked heavily at getting women on every interview panel so that there was a mix of people. Second, invested very heavily in network building, both internally and externally. The statistic about referrals is real and can have a ripple effect. Third, we instituted programs like Women in Tech, Women's Invest to help invest in women's leadership development, and had men as part of that process. Because without including the men, it is difficult to make real progress and for them to be able to help understand and be part of the solution. And then fourth, you heard, some of you may have heard Jim Barnett speak from Glint earlier. We've been an avid user of Glint before LinkedIn decided to acquire them. And the pulse surveys have been phenomenal in helping us understand our own behaviors towards inclusion and belonging, which is in part gender diversity, but it goes beyond. And so that's helped us understand things like language and perception and be able to action against that. I think we've still got room to improve, and there are still other categories of diversity which we are now turning a more concerted effort to, but really proud of the progress we've made, and I'm hopeful that it can help help us realize our vision of creating economic opportunity for every member of the global workforce. So thank you guys, and I'll open it up if there's any questions.
Firstly, let's give Sarah a round of applause. I've got a question then. Have you in any of the work research you're doing, and you've done lots of research, and I'm an avid reader of some of the stuff that you guys produce, have you actually got to the position where you started combining some of the LinkedIn data with other either external data sources, or probably with the LinkedIn example, internal, but any other external labour market data that's out there?
Yeah, so several of the reports we've put out include data sources from across the board. So for example, the World Economic Forum collaboration, that's combination of our world and theirs. A lot of the most powerful stuff actually comes from aggregated internal data, and because of the sensitivity of this topic, it's an area where we are not going deeply in.
Of course, because it's, Any questions for Sarah? Yes. I always find I have to ask one question and then hands start to go up. There we are.
Hi, I'm Jessica Barajas, and I'm from Adobe. I have a question on the LinkedIn talent insights that you're mentioning. So you mentioned that you compare gender breakdowns for our company specifically to other companies. I was wondering where you pull that data from and how you benchmark that. Yeah,
great question. And provide a little bit of clarity. The data that we will share is what we see from your company compared to industry. We don't enable you to see other companies' detailed information. And then we enable you to look at aggregate talent pool characteristics. So for example, the cloud computing skills for women in Dallas, Texas versus in San Francisco, and what does that mix look like? We use the LinkedIn data set, so it will not be 100% match of what your internal HRIS system shows. What it is, though, is a great apples to apples benchmarking versus industry. So it helps with directional window into where the challenges are and kind of where the where you might be able to push harder versus where you may be overreaching your target relative to what's there externally.
Hi, Asaf Shacha from Square. A fantastic increase in the woman proportion in the leadership. That's so cool to see such a dramatic increase in such a short amount of time. I'm just curious, how much of that was due to top of the funnel increase? So in the networking, like you're saying, or the people that you're recruiting, reaching out to new schools, whatever it might be, compared to internal stuff to get potentially women that are already in the workforce up to leadership stages. I think a lot of us, when we think of let's increase diversity, I think that the first gut reaction is let's just increase the number that we're looking at and recruiting, and let's open up those sources versus let's look internally. I'm just curious as to that increase, whether you can attribute it proportionally or just speak more to kind of how that came about.
Yeah, so we've attacked both simultaneously, and I don't have the breakdown off the top of my head. And honestly, I would say that one of the best avenues is improvements in networking among the senior leaders, which then helps both internal and external at the same time. But we've attacked both. We invested substantially in internal leadership development programs, and people who have gone through those programs then have sponsors that they work with. We've become a strong participant in conferences like Grace Hopper and others, and have leveraged those for a recruiting funnel. So we've attacked both simultaneously. I mean, I think when you're talking leadership plus, you can't solve it through an only external way. It's not as sustainable.
And Sarah, on when you were showing some of the research and you showed where the broken rung,
Yep.
you showed that 16% of women, or 16% less women will apply. Do we know why? Because is that something to do with some of the way the job descriptions are written, some of the words that are used in it, for example, and the number of bullet points?
Yeah, no, great question. So we actually, the first study we did was the Gender Insights report, where we looked at the behavioral data, and that prompted the 16%. Naturally, the first questions that came after that were why, how, what can we do to fix it? So that prompted the second study on language matters, where we looked at language, what language is used in different contexts and how it's perceived by men versus women. And we did find that there are words that are there are words used in job descriptions, like the word aggressive. Is often used to describe a fast-growing company's culture, but it has a differential impact for men versus women in how they respond to it. And there are several other examples like that.
Yeah, because I think I saw some research that, again, we're generalizing a bit here, that men will apply if they think they meet about 65%, something like that, of the job description. Women won't apply unless they feel they meet 90% of the job description. So as I think I've seen some studies out there, I think Atlassian did some work around they actually completely changed the way they put their job descriptions together for technical roles.
Yeah, I think that was a Harvard Business Review a few years ago, where it was men are likely to apply if they match 60% of the qualifications versus women. It was 90 to 100. It was pretty stark. A lot of companies have taken to changing what they put as basic qualifications versus preferred qualifications, using the job description itself as the way to describe it, as opposed to a checklist of things that you must have. And it's something that we continue to look at in terms of how can we evolve our platform to be as inclusive as possible, while giving enough targeting for recruiters to understand that to get the right candidates in the door.
Perfect. Sarah, thank you very much. It's a pleasure as
thank
ever.
you guys.